Trump's aggressive tariff strategy against Canada has completely backfired, and the numbers prove it.
U.S. President Donald Trump delivered a wide-ranging speech today before the United Nations General Assembly. In it, he called climate change the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world.
The carbon footprint is a hoax. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong. They were made by stupid people that have cost their countries fortunes and given those same countries no chance for success. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail. And I'm really good at predicting things, you know. They actually said during the campaign they had a hat, the best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true.
Should Trump's position on climate change dictate how this country proceeds with its climate agenda? Let's bring back the power panel. Emily Nicolas, Supriya Dwivedi, Peter MacKay, and Cheryl Oates. Supriya, I'll start with you on this one. Global warming, it's a hoax. I mean, we've heard the president talk about this before, but this seemed like another level when it comes to him denigrating the climate.
For the first time in decades, Americans are visiting Canada more than Canadians are visiting the United States. This historic reversal shows just how badly Trump's economic bullying has damaged America's relationship with its closest ally. The statistics are devastating for Trump's approach. According to Statistics Canada, this flip hasn't happened since 2006, excluding the pandemic years. But Trump's relentless tariff threats and his bizarre obsession with making Canada the 51st state have driven Canadians away from America in unprecedented numbers. The scale of Canadian rejection is staggering. Canadian trips to the U.S. plummeted by a massive 32.4% in July alone. That's not just a dip, that's a complete collapse of trust and goodwill. Meanwhile, American visits to Canada barely declined, dropping only 3%. This tells us everything about who's really winning this so-called trade war. Trump promised his tariffs would make America great again, but instead they've made America isolated. Wayne Smith from Toronto Metropolitan University explains what's really happening. Canadians are staying home not just because of the tariffs, but because of Trump's entire toxic approach to the relationship. They're watching immigration raids, dealing with unfavorable exchange rates, and witnessing Trump's constant attacks on their sovereignty. The economic impact on America is brutal. When people get nervous about a country's leadership, they don't visit. They don't spend money, they don't support local businesses. Smith notes that nervous travelers tend to stay closer to home, do more domestic trips, and avoid countries with unstable or hostile leadership. That's exactly what's happening to Trump's America. But here's where Trump's strategy gets even more embarrassing. While he's driving away America's best neighbors, other countries are filling the gap in Canada. Overseas visitors to Canada jumped 10.3%, with increases from Europe and Asia. The UK, France, and India are leading the charge. These countries see opportunity where Trump sees only conflict. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Americans visiting Canada are either ignoring Trump's geopolitical chaos entirely or actively supporting Canada because they believe it deserves better treatment. As Smith explains, it's business as usual for most Americans who recognize that Trump's hostility doesn't represent their values. Meanwhile, Trump's tariff war has created a perfect storm of anti-American sentiment in Canada. It's not just about economics anymore. It's about dignity and respect. When Trump repeatedly talks about annexing Canada and treats the country like a subordinate, he's insulting millions of people who used to consider Americans their closest friends. The tourism industry data reveals the true cost of Trump's approach. Canada was America's top source of international visitors, generating over $20 billion in spending annually and supporting 140,000 American jobs. Trump's reckless tariff threats are putting all of that at risk. Border communities that depend on Canadian visitors are suffering through what industry experts call a lost summer season. The ripple effects extend far beyond tourism. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been clear that the old relationship with the United States is over. Trump's tariffs have forced Canada to diversify its partnerships and reduce dependence on an increasingly unreliable American market. This represents a fundamental shift in North American relations. Trump's defenders might argue that tariffs are necessary for national security, but the evidence shows they're backfiring spectacularly. Instead of bringing Canada to heel, the tariffs have strengthened Canadian resolve and pushed the country toward other international partners. The July statistics show that Canadian return trips from overseas increased by 8.3%. Canadians are literally choosing to travel anywhere except the United States. This is what happens when you replace diplomacy with bullying. Trump's approach has turned America's most reliable ally into a skeptical neighbor. The economic relationship that took decades to build is being destroyed by a president who sees every interaction as a zero-sum game. Trump claimed his tariffs would force other countries to respect America, but they've achieved the opposite.
On the global stage. And so what we're seeing from the president when he says things like, this is the biggest con job in history, he's looking at many of the nations that the United States has worked with and has seen as allies and has called friends over these many decades.
Yeah, I mean, he described the UN as a place full of empty words, and empty words don't solve wars.
That's right. And again, we saw the president take a direct shot at the United Nations, that stage that he was on. And when you look at what we saw and heard from this president, this is typically what you think and what you expect to see from nations that are isolated. You're not going to expect to see people like Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela on the stage at the UN General Assembly, or Vladimir Putin of Russia, or Kim Jong-un of North Korea. But they have also made clear where they stand when they look at agencies, organizations like the UN and the work that they do. And today we saw the president speaking in deeply vitriolic terms about the United Nations, which also begs the question, where does the UN go from here? And what does it mean when you have...
Canada is demonstrating that it doesn't need to accept American economic intimidation. By staying home and supporting domestic tourism, Canadians are showing they have alternatives to Trump's America. The tourism reversal is just the beginning. As the trade war continues, we're seeing Canadian businesses actively seeking non-American suppliers. Retail chains report that sales of American products are down 15 to 20%, with some categories dropping by 50%. Canadians are voting with their wallets, and they're voting against Trump's America. What makes this situation even more damaging for Trump is the timing. The tourism industry is still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. American destinations desperately need international visitors, but Trump's policies are driving them away. Cities like Detroit, Seattle, and Tampa are seeing significant declines in foreign tourism, with Canadian visitors leading the exodus. The broader implications are staggering. If Trump can't maintain a positive relationship with Canada, a country that shares the world's longest undefended border and has been America's most reliable partner, how can he be trusted with more complex international relationships? The Canadian tourism reversal is a symptom of a much larger problem: Trump's complete inability to build constructive partnerships. Instead of creating win-win scenarios, Trump insists on zero-sum conflicts that ultimately damage American interests. The statistics don't lie. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, Americans are visiting Canada more than Canadians visit the United States. This historic shift represents a massive failure of Trump's economic strategy and a damning indictment of his diplomatic approach. As Wayne Smith predicts, these trends will likely continue when August figures are released. Trump's tariff war has created a new normal where America's closest neighbor actively avoids the United States. That's not making America great again. That's making America isolated, mistrusted, and economically vulnerable. The Canadian tourism reversal should be a wake-up call for American policymakers. When your closest ally starts treating you like a hostile neighbor, it's time to reconsider your approach.
But when you say things like, we don't have anything you want, you got no cards, that to me is uninformed. Because this relationship...
That is a decision for you and your policy making. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you're uninformed about the president. I just take great offense at Canadians saying our president is uninformed, our president is untrustworthy, and those types of things. And if that's the dialogue that you want, it's kind of intro.
But knowing Trump's track record, he'll probably double down on the very policies that created this mess in the first place.
It's going to fail.
As Trump criticizes the UN, we break down whether it's still living up to its promise. Jimmy Kimmel returns to late night days after being pulled off the air. And what CBC News has learned about the future of Marineland's famous belugas and where they could go next.
It's not as simple as just calling up FedEx and say, hey, I've got a shipment for you. Overnight, please.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault at the United Nations in New York.
Thanks for joining us here at the United Nations as the world gathers and Donald Trump takes center stage. The theme of this 80th UN General Assembly is Better Together, but in a 56-minute-long speech dripping with self-praise and boastful claims, Trump took sharp aim at this institution and many of its member countries. He targeted migration and green energy, the recognition of a Palestinian state, and the state of the UN building itself. He chided the group for being ineffective, but also later signaled support. And the list goes on. Off that stage, the news keeps coming. We will dig into Trump's shift in tone on Ukraine in a minute. But first, Chris Reyes takes us into that moment and that room as the U.S. president grabbed the world's attention.
Donald Trump's return to the United Nations got off to a bumpy start. This broken escalator working its way into his grievances at the podium.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle.
For nearly an hour, Trump bounced between lecturing world leaders
Your countries are going to hell.
and offering to help fix their problems, urging them to enforce strict borders